What do you get when you combine the most advanced autofocus system on the planet with the best EVF viewfinder, some great low light capabilities at a whopping 60 megapixels? Well, you get an autofocus genius that was the Sony A7RV, which was announced just a little over a week ago by Sony. While the camera is by all means outstanding and pretty much the perfect photo camera, this is why I won't be personally purchasing it. But you still should. And you should do it through Hunt's Photo and Video. First of all, can we just talk about how amazing this little new flippy tilty screen thing is? As a wildlife photographer, I absolutely love the tilt screen mechanism found on most cameras. It makes it so easy out in the field to photograph in often uncomfortable and cramped positions. But for those of you who do videography, we all know that sometimes you need a screen to flip around, and yes, this camera does that too. It's so simple, but literally genius, and it's a shame that most companies haven't implemented this yet. Let's start off with the pros of this thing. Number one, this puppy brings in a whopping 61 megapixels to the table. And for any of you who have done wildlife photography before, sometimes you find yourself cropping in a lot. And so having the 61 megapixels is super useful and essentially provides you with more cropping resolution than you'd ever have detail in your lens for. But this megapixel count is pretty obvious, so let's dive into something a little more detailed, like the fact that it has a 9.4 million dot 120 frame per second EVF. This is currently top of its field and will provide for literally the sharpest amount of detail ever to be seen through a mirrorless camera viewfinder. This will help you tack focus while out in the field without question. Speaking of tacking focus out in the field, rather than going on a rant about how everyone should learn how to manual focus, I know, let's talk about the most undoubtable, biggest selling point of this new camera, the improved AI autofocus. I really wish that we could find a good example available already from a wildlife photographer specifically testing it out on wildlife, but the best I could do is find these autofocus examples by Jason Vong in his review at Disneyland, and Tony and Chelsea did try it out on some birds themselves, but I honestly didn't really care for their review, and I thought the testing was really poor as they were shooting subjects that were all super far away and smashed right into the background at the marsh. Sony has been upgrading their autofocus system once again with a whole new smart AI learning system that can even detect when a subject has turned around, stay tracking the back of their head, and then continue following the eye when they turn back around. This is phenomenal and undoubtedly the best I've ever seen of any AF system yet available for mirrorless. They've also added in some new AF focused subjects such as insects and also separated out animal and bird into such detail that you can now choose to focus on the eye, the head, or the whole body specifically. Oh yeah, and the best part of this all, the Sony A7R IV carries over all of its autofocus features into video mode so that unlike the A1, you can actually use bird or animal eye AF in video as well. Come on, Sony. What I'm also pleased to say is that the biggest gripe about Sony that I've had for years has always been their weird color science and always super green tint shifts. However, they've been working on it over the years, and the newest model is probably the best I've seen yet and looks pretty accurate to what they should be. Gerald Undone has some great examples showing this off in his review that I'll link below, along with showing off how the noise performs in the Sony A7R V. While the noise isn't by any means the best in the mirrorless realm, it definitely might be the best performing noise control, especially with its dual native ISO. And from example files that I've downloaded all over the internet, it seems as if you're plenty safe to shoot up to 6400 ISO with no question, and even up to 12800 ISO in a pinch. Speaking of low light and low shutter speeds, for those of you curious about the stabilization, the body claims an impressive 8 stops of image stabilization, which is amongst the best in the field. Battery life is normally impressive. Horrible Sony menu designs that have been worked on in the recent years have only seemed to be further improved here, and all in all, this camera is looking like a beast. So you might be asking then, why won't you purchase this camera, Jeremy? Well, you see, let's talk about video. I honestly was this close to pulling the trigger on it, calling up Hunt's Photo and Video and being like, save me a pre-order right now. But for me, as a wildlife photography filmmaker, it didn't quite make sense. On paper, it looks pretty good. Includes 10-bit and all needed recording modes, and even has an 8K recording mode. However, two major problems arise for me. Number one, the rolling shutter is brutal in 8K and in video 4K crop modes. In wildlife photography, when you're doing quick pans and movements, this makes it pretty much unusable. However, when shooting in a bin 4K 60p, the rolling shutter actually becomes decent, but not necessarily top of the line, and probably passable for my current level of expertise. However, this is where the tricky part comes in, because when shooting in 8K, the detail and resolution looks great, but when you wind up moving down into a 4K 60p, you wind up getting a noticeable loss in sharpness and detail due to the cropping and binning going on from the huge 61 megapixel sensor to make it work. This puts me in kind of a dilemma. I can't deal with the 8K rolling shutter, yet I also don't want my images to be as soft as they get when you shoot in 4K 60p. And all this isn't even considering my second problem, that I am currently able to shoot in 4K 60p with a better rolling shutter reduction and arguably better detail retention on my Panasonic S1R. Therefore, since video has become even more important to me as a wildlife photography content creator, I'm looking to upgrade to 4K 120p 10-bit, which a camera like the Sony A1 has. Not only does the Sony A1 have this, but it also has this with an incredible detail retention that is the best in the whole Sony lineup. And the A1 also has significantly better rolling shutter handling, some of the best in class, and even better noise reduction and color accuracy at high levels of noise. Overall, it just feels like if I was buying the Sony A7RV, I would be buying it purely for the photo-oriented features, which are phenomenal, don't get me wrong. It just doesn't work for me and my future video needs of where I want to go. So does this mean I'll be purchasing a Sony A1? I guess you'll have to subscribe to find out. Before I give you guys my final thought, if you are looking to purchase the Sony A7RV, I'd highly encourage you to go check out Hunt's Photo and Video, who is the sponsor of this episode. I've been working with them a lot this 2022, and let me tell you that my experience with them has been phenomenal. They're an awesome customer-oriented, friendly camera shop, and they've worked with me on getting all of my photography needs fulfilled. Back when the Nikon Z9 craze was going on and going about, there was no one who was sure where their Z9 was or if they were getting it months later than expected. Jamin Hunter Taylor shared his testimony on a previous podcast talking about how Hunt's helped him get his quicker than pretty much everyone else out there. When making a big purchase like this, it's nice to know that a company like Hunt's Photo and Video is really working to keep the best interest of this consumer in mind. So if you wind up wanting the Sony A7RV, go check them out in my link below or send my personal representative Noah Buchanan an email in the description and he'll take care of you. So for you, if you're a wildlife photographer and don't care about shooting wildlife photography films or documentaries or just shoot wildlife videos casually as a hobby, I am 100% confident in saying that the new Sony A7RV is the best possible wildlife photography camera out there currently. If my priority was just wildlife photography images, without a doubt, 100% I would be upgrading to this camera right now. Beating out the Nikon Z9, Canon R5, and even the Sony A1 at $3,000 to $4,000 less for the same, if not better image quality in some ways. However, if you're a wildlife photography filmmaker like me and are aspiring for a higher quality camera body and you already own something pretty decent, you'll have to consider whether it's worth spending the extra money to spend a bit more and get something that will completely satisfy your video needs. This was a lot, but I hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed learning from this review, it would really help me out if you hit that like button below, and I'd be honored if you subscribe to Bird Burger if you want to see more content like this. If you want to see another camera review, check out my Canon R7 review in the end screen here, and I'll see you guys next time.